Who on earth would think that? ProgMos will rake me over the coals for this one. I have literally done a 180 on that. I mean, that's a white supremacist mantra. What, if I give you the wrong address to get to my house, that's the same as committing genocide? We freaking don't know. Loaded question. You're asking such loaded questions.
They don't get it.
They don't get it.
They're clueless.
Hey, this is supposed to bring people together and help people understand each other more. So let's not say people are clueless here. Jim Bennett is a well-known Latter-day Saint in the online space. He wrote a popular response to the anti-Mormon CES letter that has been downloaded over 200,000 times. He also hosts a podcast called Inside Out, which explores the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from both inside and outside perspectives. Jim also helped create a docu-series called An Inconvenient Faith, aimed at helping members and former members better understand one another. Now, I disagree with Jim in many areas, so I decided the best thing I could do was try to understand where he's coming from. In fact, that's the purpose of this video. What you're about to see is Jim answering a series of questions from a quiz I created called the LDS Compass Quiz. The quiz presents statements to either agree or disagree with, and it seemed like the perfect catalyst for understanding Jim's perspective. In this video, you'll also see Stephen Pinecker, a mutual friend of ours. Stephen is a non-member who loves the church and hosts the Mormon Book Reviews podcast. Before Jim took the quiz, more than 7,500 people had already participated. So as an outsider, I asked Stephen to guess whether Jim's responses would fall in the minority or majority of those who had already responded. It made for a fun and fascinating conversation. Let's take a look. Legally concealed firearms should be welcome at Sunday service.
Strongly disagree.
Okay, yeah, so you're in line with the handbook here. And Stephen, where do you think most members who responded to this, knowing that they're probably watchers of Thoughtful Faith and Word Radio, responded? How did they respond to this question?
I would say somewhere between strongly agree or agree.
Over 70% strongly agreed or agreed with that statement. So, Jim, you're in the minority so far.
Yeah.
But you are in line with the handbook, which is quite interesting that the handbook does not do that. Okay, here's the next one. Doctrine is eternal and unchanging.
Strongly disagree.
Right? Because you would say that truth is eternal and unchanging, correct, Jim?
Correct.
Okay. Stephen?
Well,
what are
I'm
you
going to
thinking
say,
here?
obviously, your audience, the audience, again, skewing in a particular direction is going to strongly agree with the idea that doctrine is unchangeable. But I'm sorry, but I think that's I understand where they're coming from, but I think it's untenable when you consider how much change has happened in the last 150 years in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. To say, it's very convenient to say the doctrine doesn't change when it changes from the term from doctrine to policy. But there was a time when it was doctrine, but then they changed it to policy. So the question I have for you is, I just think it's disingenuous to say that that's not possible, because you could reframe it from being doctrine to now policy, and so then you can have this nice workaround to say, oh no, doctrine never changes. But at one time, these views were doctrine, and they did change. But I would say your audience would say strongly agree that doctrine cannot ever change. But I think that's a real superficial understanding of
75.5% agree or strongly agree.
Okay.
And a lot of them interpret that doctrine is synonymous with truth. And so it really just depends on what you mean by doctrine. And people define it differently.
This is the thing. I mean, people will listen to that and go, geez, Jim is just this unfaithful, ProgMo, terrible, whatever. And it really is a semantics game. I don't think truth changes, but there's no question that things that have been labeled as doctrine change. And then you play this ridiculous semantic game of saying, well, it never really was doctrine. And it's just like, you know what? Let's just settle on solid definitions. I don't think truth changes. You know, Jacob would continually ask me, okay, well, do you think Jesus will ever not be the Savior? No, because it's true that Jesus is the Savior of the world, and truth doesn't change. But things that have been labeled as doctrine, I mean, if you look at the dictionary definition of doctrine, doctrine is just the teachings of a church. And there's no question that our teachings have changed, and we should expect them to change. You know, this is a church built on the idea of continuing revelation. And so we should expect, if continuing revelation doesn't change anything, then what's the point?
The sacrament should only be taken by worthy baptized members.
Uh, I'm going to say agree. And the reason I don't want to say strongly agree is that I think that 7-year-old children should take the sacrament, and they're
Okay.
not baptized.
So, Stephen, is Jim in the minority or majority here?
Well, I'd say it's going to, again, probably be a strongly agree on that from the audience, but I imagine that Jim is probably with the majority on this one.
He is with the minority. Only 37% agreed or strongly agreed with that one. And that one's
Really?
pretty split. Yeah,
Interesting.
That's interesting.
that is interesting. Okay, next one. A gay man could be called as an apostle.
Strongly agree.
Okay,
Well,
Stephen, your thought?
I would say your
Yeah.
audience would probably say strongly disagree, but there have been gay apostles. So yes, there were gay apostles. And so certainly if there were gay apostles in the past, there can be gay apostles in the present, probably, and in the future.
So about 61% disagree or strongly disagree. So that one's pretty split. It's about a 60-40. And Jim is in the minority. So far, you've been in the minority more than I thought you would on some of these, but we're getting some heavy ones right at the beginning. Okay, here's a good one. The temple recommend interview is a necessary and important process to determine worthiness.
Oh, that is. Um, I'm going to disagree. Not strongly disagree, but I'm going to disagree.
Okay, tell me more. Why do you disagree with that?
Well, because I don't think so. If I were president of the church, which is probably not happening anytime soon, I would have so I'd have 2 separate temple recommend interviews. One for the first time you go through the temple. And that first interview would be, here are the covenants. Are you willing to make these covenants? And then second, it would, after you've gone through, the temple recommended interview would be one question, which is, are you honoring and keeping the covenants that you made in the temple? Period. I mean, going through the checklist, the reason I don't strongly disagree is that I do think that people need to I don't want to say prove their worthiness, but I think that my uncle would always give the temple recommend interview when he was in stake president of Los Angeles, and proceed it by saying, I want you to realize that these questions are more about self-reflection on your part than they are about judgment on my part. And so the goal in a temple recommended interview, I think, is for the person being interviewed to reflect enough to recognize whether or not they are worthy to enter the temple, at least in my mind. And the idea that so I would like to see a process that better reflects that. And I think the current temple recommended interview process is kind of clumsy in that regard. So, but I do think there needs to be a process. I would prefer a process that's different from the one we have.
Stephen, where do you think the people who took the quiz in the
It's
past
definitely in the
landed
minority on this one.
Yeah, and more so than I thought. Nearly 90% agree or strongly agree
Yeah.
that the temple recommend is a necessary and important process to determine worthiness. All right, here's one that's a little bit more split. It was wrong for Adam and Eve to partake of the fruit.
That is a really interesting question.
Thank you.
Really well, only because I got when I was a seminary teacher in Westwood, California, right behind the Los Angeles Temple. I taught early morning seminary for 3 years. The parents of my seminary students wrote me a letter because I had taught in Sunday school prior to being, I was the young adult Sunday school teacher prior to being seminary teacher. And I had taught that I did not believe in the idea of conflicting commandments. That the whole idea that this was a fortunate fall and that God wanted them to break one commandment in order to keep another. I said that contradicts my understanding of how God works. It contradicts, I will go and do the things which the Lord had commanded, for I know the Lord giveth no commandment unto the children of men, save he shall prepare a way for them to accomplish the thing which he commanded. The idea that he set Adam and Eve up to fail was something that I just could not accept. And the parents were so concerned about my heresy on this that they wrote me a letter the year we were teaching Old Testament and said, don't teach your heresies, please. and I didn't. I just kind of stuck with the manual. But if I had answered that question 30 years ago, 30 some odd years ago, I would have said, yes, it was wrong. Now, I look at the Adam and Eve story less as a historical event and more as a metaphor for everyone's decision to enter mortality. That we liken ourselves in the temple to Adam and Eve, and each of us, in choosing to leave the presence of God, make that decision ourselves. So essentially, partake of the forbidden fruit and enter mortality, enter a world where we can die, enter a world where we can sin. And so I see it far more like that. And so in that regard, I now would say I'm not sure how you phrase the question, but it was wrong. I strongly disagree. I strongly agree that it was correct because that's the decision that each of us made. So I have literally done a 180 on that.
Interesting.
So I whichever one says that it was the right thing to do is the one I'm on. Strongly agree.
Okay. Stephen, where do you think
It's great.
others said?
It's a great question because I can see people coming at from different lenses and approaches. And Jim has got his unique take on it. I would say that he is probably near the majority on this one. But I imagine it's a pretty close call.
Yeah. 73 or so % agree with Jim on this. They either strongly agree or agree. So, wow, Stephen, you're nailing exactly how the majority of people responded. Nice. You must know and talk to a lot of Latter-day Saints.
Yes, I do. I do too. Talk to a few, now and then.
Yeah. All right. Okay, abortion can be justified.
Strongly agree. So does the church.
Right? There's
that's the thing that drives me crazy is when people get on abortion and politically insist you have to vote for Republicans because the church is so against abortion. It's like they don't realize that every one of the people outside the conference center at every general conference protesting are anti-abortion protesters who are upset that the church is too pro-choice because we do believe there are cases where it can be justified.
Stephen, where do you think people landed on this one?
I'm hoping that maybe, even though this is a more conservative audience, that there's at least enough nuance to understand that in some cases abortion can be morally acceptable. It may be a terrible thing, but still understandable in certain circumstances. So I'm kind of hoping that maybe the audience leans a little bit in Jim's direction. I could be wrong because I know we're living in the culture wars now where you have to choose a side. I know conservatives have drawn a pretty strong line here, but I'm actually giving a hopeful yes that maybe a majority might agree with Jim on this one.
And you would be correct.
All right.
55% agree or strongly agree
Okay.
Oh,
that
wow.
abortion can be justified.
Okay.
46.2% of all respondents strongly agreed. And that was what you said, Jim. So
That's what I said.
that's what you said. Okay, how about this one? The church can never be in a state of apostasy.
Well, so that's such a loaded question.
Indeed.
Because if it was the church can never be wrong, I would strongly disagree. But a state of apostasy, there are a lot. I think a lot of people that would conflate the two. That would say if the church is wrong, the church is in apostasy.
Mhm.
And I see apostasy the way they're describing it. When the church excommunicates people for apostasy, it's because they have gone so far beyond the pale that they are completely out of bounds and irreconcilable with the church. And so that would suggest that apostasy is more than just being wrong on any one or even any number of issues. It would be the idea that it is so entirely wrong that it no longer has the authority, that it no longer is actually Christ's church. And I think we have received assurances that that can never be the case, that the church will not fall. I mean, it's essentially asking, can the church be completely fallen, in the way I'm interpreting it. So I would strongly, so again, I'm not sure, what's the question
Says
again?
the church can never be in a state of apostasy is how it's phrased.
Hey, with the definition I've just described, I would strongly agree with that.
Okay. Stephen?
My 2 cents is that the restoration, the Mormonism teaches us that the church was in apostasy. That was the great apostasy that happened and that required a restoration. So if there can be an initial apostasy, why can't there be a current or a future apostasy? It stands to reason that it could happen. Also, the idea that, in the early 1830s, it was declared that the church was under condemnation for not obeying the Book of Mormon or heeding to the teachings of the Book of Mormon. And then we also have this idea that the one and mighty strong will set the church back in order. So I think that the church actually anticipates an apostasy because there's been some in the past, and some argue that the church has been on condemnation almost since the beginning. But I would say that probably a majority would go side with Jim on this one.
54% disagree or strongly disagree.
Really? That's interesting.
So this one's pretty split, but it leans towards that it can be in a state of apostasy.
Well, this is so dependent
Yeah.
on subjective definitions.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
What does
Because
church mean? What does apostasy mean?
Right.
Those are the two big ones.
I mean, because as Stephen was just outlining, he's talking about the church since the time of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Right.
interpreting this as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that has existed since
Exactly.
1830.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, so there's so many definitional qualifications there that I don't know that that's a useful data point.
Yeah. Agreed.
Fair enough.
So,
Okay. The prophet cannot lead you astray.
against them, again, it's all definitional because I come up against that one a lot because I insist that prophetic fallibility is something that we need to embrace, not just acknowledge, but embrace as a reality in order to better understand the Lord's purposes for mortality, that fallibility and mistakes are a necessary byproduct of agency, and that we came here specifically to make mistakes. We partook of the forbidden fruit, knowing that we would learn the good from the evil from our own experience, and that applies to prophets and everybody else. And no prophet has their agency extracted from them when they become a prophet. And so then I get this phrase thrown in my face, well, it says the prophet can never lead us astray. and I actually strongly agree that the prophet can't lead us astray. But
what does astray mean?
What does astray mean? And I think the answer, the key to that, can be found in things that Brigham Young had said when he was asked this, and he was asked, can prophets ever make mistakes? And he says, do not ask me such a question, for I will acknowledge that all the day long, that I can make mistakes. But he says, but I would never designedly lead this people one hair's breadth away from the truth. So I think that the promise that the prophet will never lead us astray is not a promise that the prophet won't ever wander in the wilderness for 40 years with us, as Moses did. It's a promise that it's a promise of intent, not of impact. That the prophet we're never going to have a sleeper agent as a prophet who's going to try to destroy the church from the inside. It is a promise of good faith that the prophet will always do what he feels is right and will always be working towards the truth, but it is not a promise that even as he does that his agency won't lead him to do something that is not correct. So some people would take that and say, well, Jim, you're saying the prophet can lead us astray. And the idea of leading, to me, is an idea of intent, that the prophet will never designedly, Brigham Young in another quote uses the word knowingly, that the prophet is never going to say, aha, well, here's how I'm going to destroy the church. I'm going to lead them to a place that is going to be ruinous. But it's not a promise that the prophet can't make mistakes. Your prophet can't be wrong. So with all that, I would strongly agree. The prophet can't lead us astray.
Stephen?
Two things. I think if this question was asked pre-COVID, it probably would be a majority with 10. I think there's a couple factors here that we also have to take into account. And again, different lenses of interpreting things. With this whole debate that's really gotten big in the last few years about whether Joseph Smith practiced polygamy or not, some are arguing that Joseph led people astray on it, and others are arguing that Brigham Young led people astray on this. So both sides are kind of saying that on some level. But then the idea is, if you're interpreting the prophet will never lead us astray, but a lot of people on the right vehemently push back on the idea of getting vaccines. And so I would say that your audience might be much more divided on this issue than they would have been 5-6 years ago. So I'm going to say this might be, I don't know, I could be misreading this. I think generally they're leaning towards Jim's position, but I imagine there's a lot of people who think that the prophet can lead people astray.
Okay. About 58% agree or strongly agree that the prophet cannot lead you astray.
Okay.
Interesting.
So about over 40% about would say that they disagree with that.
And I think that would have been 5 years ago, that would have been 98% of people say that could never happen. I think that skepticism about the prophet leading people astray, especially in the right, has grown measurably.
Yeah, I wish I would have given this to people prior to COVID. That'd be super interesting to see how that changed.
Yep.
Okay,
Doctrine is not well defined and therefore is not of value to discuss.
I would agree with that statement. When I say doctrine, meaning definitionally what doctrine is. I mean, I think I'm agreeing. I think it's valuable to discuss doctrine, but I don't think it's valuable to discuss what is doctrine, if that makes sense.
Like that makes sense.
The definition, defining doctrine is largely a fruitless exercise. Doctrine, in many ways, is a sort of useless word. But the things that we define as doctrines, I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't discuss the atonement, which is a doctrine, so that's kind of an imprecise question, and I think my answer is not reflective of the entirety of all the implications of what that means. But I think I'd just say agree.
Jim's probably in the minority on this.
Yeah, I think this might be the one he's the most minority compared to the other ones. 96.5%. disagree or
Well,
strongly disagree with that statement. So,
well, and I think I'm probably in agreement with them because I think definitionally they're not applying the same definition I am to this.
right.
So I mean, and I'm happy to sort of switch my answer if that's helpful, because I think it's entirely valuable to discuss doctrine, meaning it's entirely valuable to discuss the atonement. It's entirely valuable to discuss, anything that we define as doctrine, but that the word doctrine itself is sort of a useless word.
Right. Which I think that's kind of my intent when I wrote this question. So I should have worded it better. That like discussing what is and what isn't doctrine, I think is the right way to think about that question. Okay, next question. All men should wear a white shirt and tie to church on Sundays.
I would strongly disagree with that. I think and I say that wearing a shirt and tie, a white shirt every Sunday. So I have a story about this.
Okay.
I'll try to make it quick. But when I was in the USC student ward, I've had this really cool black shirt. It was like a black button-down Oxford shirt. I just thought it made me look really sleek and aerodynamic. I was just this really cool guy, and I had this pink floral tie that I just thought was the coolest thing in the world because I was quite an idiot at the time. And I would wear this to church regularly. And one Sunday, I was going to church, and my black shirt was all balled up in my closet. And I went, oh, crap, I'll just wear the white shirt. And I went, and for priesthood meeting, our bishop was giving he was teaching the priesthood meeting and said, I feel very strongly that I need to teach you, brethren, about the uniform of the priesthood. And he says, and the uniform of a priesthood is a white shirt. You need to be wearing white shirts. And I was grateful that I hadn't shown up in my black shirt, although I think my black shirt may have been the instigator for this. This was a very controversial lesson. And there were, I think, what I describe as 3 reactions to it. One was, okay, which was the reaction of most of the people. And most of them were like, okay. And they were wearing white shirts before, and they kept wearing white shirts. The next one was, you are overstepping your bounds, Bishop. This is obnoxious. You shouldn't be doing that. This was incidentally the reaction of the second counselor in the bishopric, who from that point on would wear a yellow shirt every week and sit on the stand next to the bishop in a yellow shirt. And to the bishop's credit, I mean, there was never any action taken against him. He was never released for this. It was just his way of saying, you're out of line. So the third reaction, or my reaction, was, okay, this is stupid. I do think the bishop is out of line. But if all I have to do to show this bishop that I still sustain him and think he's a good man and respect his authority, and show up with a stupid white shirt, then I'm going to show up with a stupid white shirt. This is the whole idea that I've talked about many times about sustain versus agree. I think it's a greater act of faith to sustain a leader that you don't agree with than it is to sustain a leader you agree with. So I wore the uniform of the priesthood for the rest of my time at the USC ward because that showed I sustained this bishop.
Okay.
And he is so, but personally, the idea that the Lord cares about the color of the textiles that are on your body is just kind of ridiculous to me. So I would strongly disagree.
Okay.
But I still sustain leaders that don't agree with me on that.
Stephen?
I just love watching old general conferences from the 1970s when they do the audience shots and they have a plethora of colors everywhere. The men are wearing different colored shirts. I just find this whole thing to be, I mean, as an outsider, I find it to be stupid in the sense that, church, the idea of church is come as you are, and it should be accessible. And so there's poor people, there's homeless people, there are the people that Jesus hung out with in his ministry that church attendance would be a barrier because they're not wearing the uniform. So I think that I think that we need to look, the church, if they really want to be salt and light to the world, they need to actually just get rid of the dress code altogether on some level within moderation. That's just me speaking as an outsider. I would attend more local services with my ward if I felt comfortable wearing my uniform, which includes my hat. I would probably attend more frequently at my local ward, but I know people would be upset if I'm wearing a hat. Now, but I will say people in my local ward do wear hats, and so it's not unusual that I've seen people wearing jeans, hats, shorts in my ward. So is that way, but I also don't want to come across as an outsider who's being disrespectful. So it's two-edged sword. So I'm going to argue that Jim. Okay, Jim, what did you say? You strongly agree or agree? What was that?
I strongly disagree that you need to wear a white shirt.
Okay, I'm going to say, because this is an audience that listens to Ward Radio and Kwaku wearing Playboy shirts on social media, I'm going to guess that maybe they might agree with, be more in line with Jim on this one. I don't know. It's just taking a guess.
62% are in line with Jim.
Okay. Interesting.
Either disagree or strongly disagree. So, way to go, Stephen. I'm impressed with your abilities here. Referring to members as brother or sister is uncharitable because it is not inclusive language.
Strongly disagree. Who would think that's not inclusive? What, are the people who are brothers or sisters?
Yeah,
this is because we're not inclusive to non-binary people. Is that the issue?
Yeah, this question comes from an actual stake meeting where a Relief Society president said so, almost exactly that quote in her presentation, that we should stop using the labels of brother and sister to be more inclusive to those who do not fit in a.
Well, that would be so. Even if you which I'm sure most of the Ward Radio and Jacob Hansonites don't, even if you acknowledge the validity of transgenderism, you don't. Transgender people aren't asking us to eliminate pronouns altogether, which is what this kind of is. I mean, to say that saying brother and sister is not inclusive means that if you use he pronouns for anybody, that's somehow not inclusive, and that just strikes me as ridiculous. I mean, maybe if you want to come up with some other term for a non-binary person that doesn't want to be considered a brother or sister, I'd be open to discussing that. That strikes me as a little bit of a solution in search of a problem, because I think that non-binary people have already figured out ways to navigate that. They live in a reality where peoples are brothers and sisters. So that just strikes me as very silly. I would strongly disagree.
Right. And no surprises, Stephen. I already know what you're going to say. Yeah. 97% disagree with that. So maybe not the best question.
Well, and actually, it's interesting because when I heard that question initially, I thought they were referring to people who were non-members who would not be referred to as brother and sister because they're not members of the church. So that's
see, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah.
So that's interesting.
And then speaking as an outsider, I will say though that I have had Latter-day Saints call me Brother Steve. So I don't know what to do with that, but yeah, interesting stuff.
Well, we believe you are Brother Steve. We believe we're all brothers and sisters. Membership in the church is not determinative.
Okay, fair enough.
Brother and sister status.
Awesome.
Yeah, I agree. Brother Steve. Yeah. Okay. Ultimately, leaving the church can be a good thing.
That one, that is way loaded. Way loaded. I have to agree. And I know that I'm in the sliver of minorities.
But you don't strongly agree. You just agree.
I don't strongly agree because I don't think leaving the church is a good thing as a rule. As a rule, I want to see everybody feel welcome at church, and I want to do everything I can to keep people and invite them. I mean, I don't want to shame them into staying in church, but I want church to be a place where they feel welcome and they feel loved. But the idea that there is never a time when it is good for somebody to leave. That's just way too absolutist for me, and I have to make allowances for the fact that sometimes it is better. So I feel like I have to agree.
I'm going to say Jim's on the minority on this. And speaking of somebody who was an atheist for 13 years, I have a much more nuanced understanding of this too. The necessity, even for people to become atheists, because maybe they suffered such spiritual and religious trauma and PTSD that even the concept of God can be triggering. So I go so far as to say sometimes people even have to lose their faith in God to help them. But I imagine that Jim is on a minority on this one.
Yeah, so about 75% disagree or strongly disagree.
But I'm surprised that it's that large in terms of the 25% who agree with me. I thought this was going to be another 97% one.
Yeah.
No, I think that there's a little bit of nuance there, and I think people bring to the table.
Sure.
All right, question about the word of wisdom. Decaf coffee is not against the word of wisdom.
It's to some degree an irrelevant question, as far as I'm concerned. Because the word of wisdom, defining what the word of wisdom is a bit of a fool's errand. Because the word of wisdom bears no resemblance to Section 86 of the Doctrine and Covenants at this point. I mean, Section 86 describes mild drinks made of barley, which is a description of beer.
Yep.
And that beer is acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And that the word of wisdom also, I mean, hot drinks has come to mean coffee and tea. The reality is now that the word of wisdom is now not, bound by Section 86. We have decided that the word of wisdom is a specific sort of thing where coffee, tea, alcohol, tobacco, and drugs, illegal drugs. And even though they're not mentioned in the word of wisdom at all in Section 86. So using our current definition, I don't see any way that decaffeinated coffee wouldn't be against the word of wisdom. I would say yes, I would agree. I'd probably even strongly agree that
it's not against the word of wisdom?
Oh, I strongly disagree that it's not against the word of wisdom.
Okay. Stephen.
Well, that's great. I wonder, that's a great question. I think a more Orthodox Latter-day Saints would say that non-alcoholic beer and decaffeinated coffee would fall under the idea that you can't use those things or consume those items. So I'm going to say that Jim might be on the minority on this one.
Jim is in the majority.
Okay.
54.5%. Oh, wait, unless you misunderstood what Jim was saying. So Jim strongly disagrees with this. So he says it is against the word of wisdom.
Right.
Right. So 54.5% also say that decaf coffee is against the word of wisdom. So I think you were right, Stephen. We just got mixed up on that.
Yeah.
Everyone who wants to get to the celestial kingdom will get to the celestial kingdom.
Strongly agree.
Okay.
Gary. I'm a bit of a universalist. I mean, I think eventually everybody gets there. I believe in movement between the kingdoms, which Bruce R. McConkie thinks is one of the seven deadly heresies.
That question's coming up.
Oh, okay. Yeah. But yeah, eternity's a freaking long time. The idea that God gives up on you at some point just doesn't strike me as making any sense.
Stephen, what do you think, how people responded to...
I might be paraphrasing Joseph Smith, but didn't he say something like eternity without progression would be hell? So I imagine, or something along those lines. So I imagine that there's this idea that one could continue to progress in the eternities. And I'm hopeful that the audience feels that way too. So I'm hopeful that Jim might be in the majority on this one.
He's not. 48.8% agree or strongly agree. So that means that's where Jim landed and agrees strongly.
Pretty split.
So
that's pretty split.
That's
very
50-50 to me. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Interesting. Tithing should be paid before anything else, including taxes.
So this is gross versus net, right? I mean, that's essentially what you're, because it doesn't matter if I pay my lighting bill before I pay my tithing, that doesn't alter the tithing. But if I pay my taxes before my tithing, I'm assuming that means that you're not paying taxes on, you're not paying tithing
on the gross.
On the gross. So this has been, a discussion, ongoing discussion in my own marriage. We've had to negotiate this. I've had a lot of conversations about this with a lot of people, and where I have landed, because I don't want to give anybody, and I don't want anybody to get any information about how I pay my tithing. I don't think that's anybody's business on this.
Right.
But I also think it's on anybody's, when you're asked if you're a full tithe payer, there is no tithing audit to determine how you've come to that conclusion. If you pay taxes on your gross, you pay taxes or tithing on your gross, tithing on your net. If you pay, a lot of people ask, well, can I pay tithing by giving money to charities outside the church and count that as tithing? Can I, this, that, the other. I remember even on my mission, we had these little cassette tapes where you listen to people role play and the discussion on tithing. They'd say, well, what is tithing? And the missionary in the role play, what am I paying 10% on? Says you're paying 10% on whatever you determine is your income. And that was the phrase in the role play. And I remember as a missionary going, no, you pay tithing on your gross. What are you talking about? I was like, yeah, no, this is nonsense. But given now the church has been really pretty explicit in the handbook that bishops are not supposed to ask follow-up questions to determine that. So I would probably strongly disagree with how that question is framed, because I don't think anybody, except the person paying the tithing, should be determining what constitutes a full tithe. So I would strongly disagree.
Okay, fair enough.
That does not mean that I don't think that you should pay tithing on your gross.
Right.
I just want that out there very clearly. I don't want anybody to interpret this as, well, now I know how Jim Bennett pays his tithing. Right. I don't think it's anybody's business except the person paying the tithing.
You just disagree that there should be a should for everyone. You
Correct.
think it should be independent, like individually, and the Lord.
I think that's between you and the Lord, and I don't think arbitrary standards applied by somebody else are appropriate.
I respect that. Stephen, where do you think people landed on this question?
That's a great question. I'm hopeful that people have had these conversations. I imagine even people more conservative have had these discussions. Had a great conversation.
This conversation happens all the time in church. And
Aaron Brewster came on my program. He's an accountant, and he's a faithful Latter-day Saint, and did a great, masterful presentation about how a 10% tithe is actually very regressive to poor people. And it said there's more than one way to approach a tithing. I'm thinking that okay, re-ask the questions. I just want to hear it. And Jim, you said strongly disagree. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. What was the question, Rylan?
Tithing should be paid before anything else, including taxes.
I'm going to say that it's leaning in Jim's direction, but it's a close call.
So 58% agree or strongly agree with that one.
Okay.
58%.
Well, I'm in the minority.
Okay. You're in the minority. Yep.
Okay, a minority, but still a strong, solid 42%. So in favor of Jim. So again,
split.
I think it's close on that one. Okay, good stuff.
Okay. Eternal marriage has and will always be between one man and one woman.
Jacob Hansen is waiting very closely to hear me answer this question. I'm going to agree with that. I'm not going to strongly agree with that, but
okay.
I'm going to agree.
Okay. Stephen, where do you think people landed on this one?
So what happens to those who have multiple wives? Are they only eternally sealed to one woman, or?
Oh, yeah. Ooh, I hadn't thought of that. So is that a question about polygamy in heaven and not a question about gay temple ceilings?
Right. Well, I mean, we have to look at this from more than just
Kind of
one
about
lens,
both.
right? I mean, in theory, within the restoration, of course, you can be married to more than one man and one woman, because it's a practice that there was all the first few prophets practiced that. So I would say that no, I disagree, because within Mormon theology, there are people that are married to multiple spouses in the eternities.
But that's multiple marriages, and this question says eternal marriage.
Right. But that's not fair, because you believe in eternal marriages, and President Nelson is sealed to 2 women. And so.
Right. But it depends on, like, what do you mean by it? Like, what does eternal marriage mean? Is it talking about the individual marriages, or is it talking about marriages plural? And then it kind of depends on how you interpret that.
Well, it's just, look, your church brought in the idea of non-monogamy into the picture. So this is your this is
our problem.
If it changes, it's because God wants it to change, and God reveals that to his servants to change. There's no indication that will be the case. So I have to agree that I don't see any evidence that it's going to change. And when Jake is like, oh, well, Jim, you're being disingenuous. It's like, no, what I've said is I've never called for this to change. I've never said it's going to change. What I have said is that I believe that there is further light and knowledge to be had on the issue of how we include our LGBTQ brothers and sisters in the church. We have seen changes, significant changes, in my lifetime, not just in my lifetime, but in a very short span of time. We've gone from Proposition 8 to the Respect for Marriage Act in 15 years. I mean, that's remarkable. The amount of we now say that people do not choose to be gay. We now say that sufficient righteousness does not make your sexual orientation change. And that is a massive shift from when I was growing up. That's a massive shift from Point K. Packer. So we have seen changes with regard to that, and I think we will see more of them. But I would never say that I know what those changes are going to look like in advance. I would never say what that further light and knowledge will look like. And I don't see any indication that it will include same-sex marriage temple ceilings the way we perform. Will there be some other accommodation? Will it be something I don't understand or that none of us anticipate? I don't know. But I don't have any indication that same-sex temple ceilings are on the table. So I would agree with that statement. And Jacob Hansen is going to sit there and scream at me and say that I'm lying, but that's where I am.
Okay, Stephen, where do you think the majority landed on this one?
Well, probably the majority would land on Jim's side on this, that marriage is between a man and a woman within the context of the whole same-sex debate, but also with the caveat that it put on there is that, but also there are, within your belief system, there are men who are sealed to multiple women. But I would say majority probably agree with Jim.
Yeah, 66%.
Oh, it's not as big as one. I thought that would be another 97% one. But
no. There's a lot of confusion. Oh, I shouldn't bring that up. All right, I'm just teasing. Okay, let's move on to the next one. If people want to see more conversation about that, they can watch
There's plenty of places to see conversation about
even
that,
you and I have talked about it, Jim, on a live stream.
Yeah,
So there's lots of places to learn about it.
Be aware.
Killing can be justified.
I'll strongly agree.
Okay. You're thinking of Nephi here?
No, I'm not thinking of Nephi. I'm thinking of...
A lot of people think of Nephi and Laban.
Well, there's Nephi and Laban, sure, but how many times do we excommunicate military members who go to war and kill on behalf of the country? The answer is 0. I mean, we recognize the commandment, thou shalt not kill, is by most scholars' accounts, that's a mistranslation. It's thou shalt not murder.
Yep.
Which is different from thou shalt not
Which is
kill.
unjustified killing.
Well, not just unjustified. I mean, yeah, but I mean, it's intent to take someone's life. For, I guess unjustified or unrighteous purposes. But the killing in self-defense is entirely justified and entirely moral. I mean, the idea that all killing is immoral, I just don't see any support for that. You don't have to go to Nephi for that. I mean, I think it's all throughout human history that we all recognize there are times when you have to take someone else's life. It's not something anybody, I think, wants to do. If you do want to do it and you enjoy it, then you're probably murdering somebody and you're violating the commandment. But if someone comes after you with an axe and you shoot them before they can bury it in your head, I think God's kind of happy about that.
Yeah, I think it's, you chose an axe there. That's kind of funny. I don't know. Stephen, your thoughts, and then where do you think people landed?
Well, first of all, I do think that the Ten Commandments is actually condemning premeditated murder, specifically. Also, I'd make an argument, and this might be a little spicy, but I think there's enough in the scripture with a very careful reading of the whole Laban thing, that Laban may have already been dead when Nephi chopped off his head. So that's just a little provocative thing I'll throw out there. But I would say a majority.
I've heard that before. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I heard that some obscure thing years ago, somebody talking about that. So I would say the majority would go with Jim, and this would probably be like a 90-something% one.
Yep, 90, almost like 90% exactly.
Okay.
90.5% agree or strongly agree. So Jim is in the majority. Next question. It is appropriate and good to pray to Heavenly Mother.
I would strongly disagree with it.
Okay. Any more thoughts there?
No. Well, I think that they just made that very clear. It's not that I would strongly condemn anybody who disagrees with me on that, but right. I don't see an avenue where that is. I think the church has been very, very clear that we're supposed to pray to the Father in the name of the Son.
Okay. Stephen?
I think a large portion of people would side with Jim on that one.
About 88% side with Jim on that one. They disagree or strongly disagree. All right. In heaven, a man and a woman are not required for creation of spirit children. Do you need a man and a woman to create spirit children in exaltation?
Okay, so what you're saying is, are spirit children created sexually the way physical children are created? Is that the?
That's one way to interpret it. Yeah, it's kind of getting at spirit birth. If you need a man and a woman, not necessarily in a sexual way, but like, is a man and a woman required for a process that creates spirit children?
I mean, this is one where I really need a neutral option. Because the reality is, we freaking don't know. This is the thing that drives me. I mean, we don't. And there's contradictory information all over the place. You know, you read Abraham chapter 3, where God, stands among the intelligences and says, these I shall make my rulers. And then, so how does an intelligence become a spirit? I mean, Jacob likes to quote Kwaku L as the poster child for heresies. And, Kwaku has leaned into the contradiction here because there's an element, at least there's a theological strain in our doctrine of this idea that we are co-eternal with God. There is something in us that is entirely that God did not create, that is non-created, and sort of the conventional wisdom. But again, there's absolutely no scripture that says this. The conventional wisdom that has sort of congealed around this is this idea that there's something called intelligence that is eternal, that God somehow fashioned into a spirit. And then there's the assumption that that's done through some kind of sexual or man and woman thing, which again doesn't make any sense to me, because why would two physical beings create sexually a spiritual child? I mean, we are going to be physical beings after the resurrection. So how does sexual relationship create a spiritual child? The God Bakers talks about endless celestial sex.
I was going to say that. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I don't see any indication one way or the other. So for me to weigh in on that, I'd probably have to say disagree because I'm not going to strongly disagree, because maybe that's true, but we freaking just don't know. And if we don't know, I'm not going to say yes, absolutely. I mean, I think so. I think it's likely that my understanding of how posterity works, it's going to require a man and a woman. But I'm not going to say I know, because nobody does. And nobody does, and anybody that tells you they do, I don't think is telling you the truth.
Yeah. There's a lot of different schools of thought here that I'm trying to kind of get at where someone lands. There's kind of like Brigham Young, who's very much spirit birth, when it sounds like.
I'm not calling Brigham Young a liar. I know. Yeah. I think Brigham Young absolutely believes that. But the reality is we don't have any recorded revelation on the subject. We just really genuinely don't know. And if we don't know, I'm not going to say, yes, I agree. It absolutely is that way.
Right. And then you have Elder McConkie, who kind of said that he was a little bit hybrid. He said intelligence is like the substance from which we were created.
Yeah.
And then you have Joseph Smith, who says we're co-eternal with God, meaning like intelligence is synonymous with just spirit. And so like it's more of like an adoptive type thing. And he kind of even changed it a little bit throughout his life. So there's a lot of questions here. And that's just kind of where I'm trying to see where you kind of land. Stephen, so this one, is one that like is very interesting to me, because I think there's a lot of there's plenty of room for people to believe all sorts of things within the church. And this is one thing where people kind of diverge.
I want you to re-ask the question real quick, because I just want to hear it.
Yeah. And this one is one of the worst written ones.
I agree.
So, in heaven, a man and a woman are not required to create spirit children. So he's trying to say that like.
So I would agree with that statement.
Okay, sorry. So you forgot the not.
Yeah, not because I think a man and a woman are required, but because I would reject any sort of absolute statement. One way or the other. So I can't say that they are required. I can't really say that they're not required. Okay. So actually, I don't know. Do I agree or do I disagree? Which one?
I think it would have been better if you just said are required, and then because that would maybe clear it up a little bit.
Yeah, I don't want to definitively say they're not.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm.
So you okay?
I think this is it's a not the best worded question, but I'm going to say a majority might be siding with Jim on this.
Yeah. Okay. So Jim, you don't want to be absolute, so you just disagree with the statement that they're absolutely not required.
Yeah, I guess so.
So you put disagree. So this one, about 60% disagree or strongly disagree. So I think they are in line with Jim here, where they don't want to be absolute about like what that looks like. Okay, next one. It is possible that one day a woman will be a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles.
I'd strongly agree. I don't think it's likely.
But it's possible. So
sure, of course it's possible. Why wouldn't it be possible?
All right, Stephen?
I'm going to say that the Jim is probably on the minority on this one.
Okay, you are correct. Jim is in the minority on this one. Let me just do some math here. Nearly like 84% disagree or strongly disagree.
I mean, I don't think it's likely, but when you say possible, I don't want to put limits on what God can do. This is the thing that drives me crazy. It's like, well, this could never, I mean, this is why I get so kind of up in arms about this can never, ever, 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 ever change. It's like, do you realize that if it does change, it changes because God wants it to change? So if God wants a woman to be in the form of the 12 apostles, I don't see any indication that he does, and I don't see any indication that it's likely to happen. But to say it's impossible and that God can't do it, I find that kind of absolutist interpretation to be somewhat ridiculous.
Okay, here's a related question that is an absolute statement. Women will never hold the priesthood.
Well, that's kind of a different one, though.
Yeah.
Well, because then you're asking for, because I don't think it's likely that women are going to hold the priesthood, or I don't see any indication that they're going to hold the priesthood. But it's different from saying they. But still, I don't want to be absolutist, so I'm gonna disagree.
Okay. Stephen.
I'm going to say Jim is probably in the minority on this, but I also just want to give props to people who have done some great research that indicate that Joseph did confer the priesthood onto the Relief Society president Emma and the Relief Society members. So the argument is that women do have the priesthood, but I'm going to say majority probably go would agree. Or what did Jim? You agree or disagree that women? Well, you're saying that women will never have the priesthood, Jim. You're agreeing with that, or you're disagreeing with that?
I'm disagreeing with that just because
say,
I'm not comfortable with absolutist statements.
Right, and I think yeah, and again with the caveat that there is a strong indication that women already do hold the priesthood in your church, but I would say that Jim is in the minority on this one.
65% agree or strongly agree that women will never hold the priesthood. So.
Again, that's a larger minority than I thought it would be.
Okay. It is not possible to be born into the wrong body.
Oh, I'd agree with that. I'd strongly agree with that.
Okay. So you, okay. You don't buy that like someone could be born into the wrong body and then need a like transition or anything like that?
See, I can see the assumptions you're attaching to that.
Yeah. But I'm trying to like throw assumptions on you to see if you.
But I think I don't think a transgender person is born into the wrong body.
Okay.
Even if they're transgender. So I'm rejecting your assumption, and I am agreeing with that statement. I don't think anybody's born into the wrong body.
Stephen?
I think a large percentage of people would agree with Jim on this.
85% agree or strongly agree. Okay, next question. This one's about the law of chastity. Same-sex kissing violates the law of chastity.
I'd strongly disagree.
Okay, and I know you and I have talked about this a little bit before. The law of chastity doesn't explicitly say that. Is that why you would strongly disagree with that statement?
Well, we talked about particularly. I mean, this became a big issue when BYU changed its honor code, and ostensibly they would say, okay, well, we're going to treat gay people and apply the same standard to gay people that we apply to heterosexual people. And if we do that, we don't excommunicate or punish heterosexual people for engaging in kissing, for which I am quite grateful. I quite enjoyed kissing before getting married. And so I don't see any logical, rational reason why we should apply a higher standard to same-sex kissing that we apply to heterosexual kissing, because that's what we'd be doing. You're not engaged in sexual intercourse. You're not engaged in sexual relations. So yeah, I would strongly disagree.
So 72.9% agree or strongly agree that same-sex kissing violates the law of chastity.
They don't get it.
They don't get it.
They're clueless.
Hey, this is supposed to bring people together and help people understand each other more. So let's not say people are clueless here.
Well, I think they are.
Next question. Progress from the Telestial Kingdom to the Celestial Kingdom is possible.
Strongly agree.
Okay, you already talked about this one a little bit. What do you think, Stephen? Where do you think people land on this one, that you can progress from kingdom to kingdom?
I mean, if you got a lot of McConkie Mormons in the Jacob Hansen camp, they're going to probably say, take the opposite position that Jim did. But I would hope that in the 21st century, people are kind of getting a better understanding of the eternities within the Mormon cosmology. So I'm kind of hopeful that maybe a majority might be leaning towards this with Jim.
56.7% disagree or strongly disagree that progress from the Celestial Kingdom to the Celestial Kingdom is possible.
Well, but that's 40-some% agree with Jim. That's a pretty strong. And
43.2%.
And I will predict 10 years from now,
Jim.
if you ask that question, it will flip.
Okay, here's a good one. Here's one that's debated. It's just a quote, a famous quote from church history. As man now is, God once was. As God now is, man may be. Do you agree, disagree?
I strongly agree, mainly because it's also the best line from Battlestar Galactica. Go back and watch the original series. Starbuck is brought onto the ship of lights and was told, as you are, we once were, and as we are, you may become.
So, fun fact, Jacob Hansen disagrees with this one. So, Stephen, where do you think people landed on this? Do they agree with Jim or Jacob?
I think most people would side with Jim on this one.
You are correct. Nearly 90, hold on, 90%, 90.5%.
So Jacob Hansen is a distinct minority on this one. That's very interesting to me.
Yeah.
That is really interesting.
Yeah. Brigham Young was racist.
Oh, strongly agree.
Okay.
Is there anybody that can disagree with that? Is there any church
People
leader
do.
that would disagree? That's bizarre to me. Of course, Brigham Young was a racist.
So where do you think people land, Stephen?
I think people might probably be leaning with Jim on this one, because I mean, even Jacob Hansen, I think, admits that Brigham's a racist. So I don't see this as being necessarily a controversial statement anymore. Maybe in the past it would have been, but I think people coming around on that one.
58% agree or strongly agree that Brigham Young was racist.
42% of people can look at Brigham Young and say that's not racist.
41.9%.
Bizarre to me.
Disagree.
Very bizarre.
Oh.
It is very difficult to make it to the Celestial Kingdom.
There's so many definitional issues with that. It's impossible to make it to the Celestial Kingdom without Christ. It's very easy to make it to the Celestial Kingdom through Christ's grace. And I'm going to have to disagree with that. It's difficult. I have to fall down on the side of grace.
Okay. Stephen?
That's a tough one. I think Jim might be in the minority in this, but I can see a lot of people. I think Jim's in the minority, but maybe not by as much as some people might think.
So this one is probably, sorry. Hold on. This one is 49.8% agree or strongly agree that it's very difficult to make it to the Celestial Kingdom. So it's basically a 50-50.
50-50. Okay.
But I'm in the very slim majority. Is that right?
Yes, you're in the very slim majority.
Okay.
Okay. Good for me.
Excommunication is often unnecessary.
Strongly agree.
Okay, more thoughts on that, Jim?
Yeah, I think the church is kind of...
It's not called excommunication anymore.
It's not called excommunication anymore. I know that President Oaks recently said we're not seeing enough of them, which would...
Did he say that?
Well, to some degree, yes. But I don't know when it happened, but there was kind of an announcement about it. The excommunications were far more common when I was younger. And then the edict came down. I'm being very vague because I don't remember where this is, and so I may just be misremembering. but my understanding is that people like teenagers, for instance, used to be excommunicated for sexual transgressions, and I don't think that ever happens anymore. I think they recognize that that's something that can be handled without excommunication. The policy of the church seems to be leaning more and more and more into the idea that excommunication is an absolute last resort, and that they're, disfellowship, but, and again, I member restrictions now as opposed to member withdrawal. They're becoming more and more commonplace rather than the extreme measure of removing someone's membership. So
Okay.
I think I'm in line with the handbook on this one, but I could be wrong.
Stephen, what do you think people said? Excommunication is often unnecessary.
Okay, that's the question. Okay.
Yep.
Boy, I would hope that enough people in the audience understand the idea of bishop roulette and how arbitrary this can be. And I'm hopeful that they would side with Jim on this one, because I think people have seen that there's less of it there was much more of it in the past. It's happening less and less. But I also understand this tendency on the right to gatekeep and want to have more excommunications. I was going to say Jim's on the majority, but I'm going to say he's on the minority on this one.
67% agree or disagree or strongly disagree that it is often unnecessary. So Jim is in the minority here.
All right.
One should always follow the prophet, even if he is wrong.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Okay.
I mean, that's my model, is that you sustain leaders by following them. I think, for instance, that President Nelson is wrong about the word Mormon. But I try not to say Mormon because I sustain the prophet.
Okay.
Now, but of course there are boundaries to this. The prophet tells me to commit adultery, or I don't know. Extreme examples. Jacob, in our last conversation, is like, what if the prophet told you to deny the resurrection? And I said, no. And he says, see, that's just the same as me saying I won't take down a YouTube video if the prophet tells me to. And I'm like, really? You're drawing an equivalence between those two things? So the answer is, I would agree, presupposing the idea that a prophet operates within appropriate boundaries. Because I think a prophet can be wrong within certain boundaries, but when he crosses certain boundaries, he probably would cease to be a prophet. So, but I would agree.
Stephen, where do you think people landed?
I think people might lean with Jim on this one.
58.6% disagree or strongly disagree that one should always follow the prophet, even if he is wrong.
Interesting.
Interesting indeed. It is wrong to exclude transgender individuals from the temple.
No. This is such a charged question. Because, okay. I have transgender relatives. Now, I'm not going to be more specific than that because they haven't given me permission to speak about them. As far as I know, maybe this isn't the case, but as far as I know, there's been absolutely no medical transition. They identify as a gender opposite than their birth gender, but have taken no medical measures to do that, but they present as the gender opposite from the one that they were born with. There's no other violation of any kind of commandment. They're not committing any kind of adultery. They're not engaged in sexual sin. they live the standards of the gospel by every other measure. I don't see any possible reason to say, well, then you can't go to the temple because you think you're a gender opposite from the one that you were born with. I don't see any scriptural, if I go to the temple and I think I'm Abraham Lincoln, no one's going to say, well, you're not Abraham Lincoln, so you can't go to the temple because you're crazy. You think you're Abraham Lincoln. Well, okay, but a lot of people believe a lot of crazy things and they still go to the temple because they live according to the standards. So I can't see any measurable reason to exclude the people I'm talking about. I mean, once you get into sort of medical interventions, I mean, transgenderism really is, I mean, everybody again think, Jim the ProgMo. Transgenderism is really, really fraught. There are a lot of issues to consider, and the lot that's very difficult. I am very strongly against any sort of permanent medical intervention for minor children. I think the idea of making those kinds of decisions, irreversible decisions, before you're an adult, I have a real problem with that. And a lot of transgender advocates would think that that's a bigoted stance to take. At the same time, I think once you're an adult, I don't see any reason not to treat people who are transgender with love and respect and acceptance. But I can also see why the church would, there are so many contradictory, difficult challenges in that. But based on this question, and I'm sure I would come in a minority, is I would agree that it is wrong to keep transgender people out of the temple, given the scenario I've just described. Now, is it wrong to keep somebody out of the temple if they are actively violating other commandments subjectively? I don't know of the commandment that says thou shalt not say you're a woman if you're really a man. But I think that if you start having sex outside of marriage and you start, then you're clearly in violation of the law of chastity, whether you're transgender or not. So those are the lines that I think should be in place for temple attendance, not adding a line about how you think about your gender. So knowing I'm going to be wildly in the minority, I'm going to say, yes, it is wrong to exclude transgender people from the temple.
So, Stephen, Jim says he's in the minority. Do you think he's right?
I think he's right, but I also think, man, sometimes this audience, I'm glad you talked this through, Jim, because I really think it's important that when we discuss these things, it's not in absolute terms, it's not black and white. And I think you give a very thoughtful, nuanced approach that I wish more people would take to this subject. So yeah, I'm going to say Jim's in the minority on this.
76% disagree or strongly disagree that it's wrong to exclude transgender individuals from the temple. So he is in the minority. Stealing is always wrong.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. Because that's like saying murder is always wrong, which is different from killing is always wrong.
Okay.
Stealing implies intent, that you know what you're doing. You are taking something that is not yours, and you're doing so willfully knowing that it is wrong. So yeah, given the intent that I think is inherent in that word, I'd strongly disagree that stealing is always wrong.
You strongly agree with that? You strongly agree that?
Strongly agree. I'd strongly agree that stealing is always wrong.
I just want to add,
Stephen?
I want to say that the father who just lost his job and he's got a family of starving children, and he goes into the grocery store and steals bread, I don't think that's wrong.
It's the Jean Valjean example.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, again, this becomes a thing. Is that very often life is a series of bad options. Jean Valjean stealing bread, you can see it was the best of many bad options, but it doesn't make stealing right. But I do think it makes that the idea that he should be pursued by Javert for the rest of his life as a result. You know, I just think inherently as a Platonic ideal, it is wrong to steal. Now, C.S. Lewis gets into this, Stephen. I don't know if you've read this in Mere Christianity, but he talks about one of the best evidences of God is that we all have this sort of moral conduct that we know instinctively, that's written on our hearts. The law is written on our hearts in ways that we don't have to describe. Like, so when you say, okay, I've reduced this to something I called the parable of the parking lot. Okay, you're in a parking lot and there's somebody waiting for somebody else to pull out of a spot. And then somebody else comes, and before that person who's been waiting can take the spot, then somebody else comes and they get into the spot. And they say, can that ever be, is that right? And can that ever be right? And people say, well, yeah, yeah, it can be right. I mean, what if this is in a hospital and this is a pregnant woman and she needs to get in or has an injury and needs to be treated right away? And it's like, okay, so nobody ever would say, well, yes, that person is justified because they got their second. Because we all know instinctively that the person who got there first is justified in getting the spot. So what you're doing is finding ways to find exceptions to the moral rule that we all instinctively know is right. I mean, nobody would even ever begin to argue, well, the person who got there second should get the spot. We all know that's not right. We all know instinctively that's not right. And so when you start talking about Jean Valjean or talking about stealing a loaf of bread to feed your starving family, at no point are we saying they're engaged in a morally correct act. We're saying we can justify them violating a moral standard because there was some other standard that was more important. So I don't know if that's too technical or too ridiculous, but
fair enough.
No,
Well,
I like it. Stephen, yeah.
Love it. I'd say Jim is in the majority on this one.
Yeah, about 66.5% agree or strongly agree that stealing is always wrong. All mistakes are equal in the eyes of God.
Strongly disagree. Who on earth would think that? What, if I give you the wrong address to get to my house, that's the same as committing genocide? I mean, of course, that's nonsense. Strongly disagree.
Okay, Stephen?
I think the majority are with Jim on this.
Yeah, about 83% disagree or strongly disagree. 84%. Okay. Next one. Personal revelation is more important than anything the prophet says.
What a loaded question. You're asking such loaded questions. Because it's so, you can't divorce the thing, divorce them. I mean, one of the reasons I understand how to seek and understand and interpret personal revelation is that I understand the value of prophets. And I understand, I mean, you know, so to say I'm going to receive a personal revelation, I don't know. I honestly don't know the appropriate way to answer that question in any way that would be useful to anyone. Ask it again so that I can come up with.
Yeah, just go with the gut feeling here. Gut reaction. Personal revelation is more important than anything the prophet says.
Okay, I'm going to use the word anything to lean into that and say that there are certainly things that prophets have said that are more important than some of my personal revelation. So I'm going to disagree. Not strongly disagree because I really hate the question.
Okay. Good to hear you hate some of the question. I knew that would happen. So does everyone. Everyone hates some of these questions. Stephen, but they're thought-provoking in the very least, so
Yeah.
and that's what I want.
I think Jim's on the majority on this.
About 76% disagree or strongly disagree with personal revelation is more important than anything the prophet says, so Jim is in the majority. Okay, next question. The Book of Mormon is historically accurate.
I would agree to some degree. I think there are historical elements to the Book of Mormon. I mean, we've had, Stephen and I have had lengthy discussion of this on the Inside Out podcast.
Right. Good episode.
So I don't, you know, the whole idea, the idea that it's all historically accurate. Yeah, disagree. But there are certainly historical elements there. At least I believe there. So I would agree.
Stephen?
I think a majority would agree with Jim on this, and I don't completely close the door on the idea that there's a possibility that there might be historicity in the Book of Mormon as well.
88.3% agree or strongly agree that the Book of Mormon is historically accurate. Next question. Emma Smith did nothing wrong.
I will always strongly disagree with any statement that anybody never did anything wrong. Everybody does things wrong. We come to mortality, we come to earth, we all do things wrong. I strongly disagree. That should not be interpreted to mean that I have any particular beef with Emma Smith on anything. But those statements, like, because, the Desnats love to say that one of their mantras is Brigham Young did nothing wrong. And it's nonsense. Everybody does things that are wrong. You're using that as sort of a Nazi kind of, it stems from Hitler did nothing wrong. I mean, that's a white supremacist mantra. And so whenever you attach did nothing wrong to something, I'm always going to disagree with it. Always, reflexively.
So you can kind of see the origins of this question. Then I flipped it to be about Emma Smith instead of about Brigham Young to see how people would react.
Right.
Stephen, what do you think?
I think a majority would side with Jim on this.
Okay. 68.6% disagree or strongly disagree that Emma Smith did nothing wrong. Another question about tithing. Any excess tithing funds should go directly to helping the poor.
I'm going to disagree, not because I don't want to see excess tithing funds go to the poor, but I don't think, when I pay my tithing, I don't attach conditions to it. I trust the brethren. I know that, and this is probably, ProgMos will rake me over the coals for this one, but I give the tithing as a free donation, and I sustain the brethren that they're going to do what they're going to do with it. And if I don't like what they do with it, so what?
Okay.
I would like to see tithing money go to the poor and excess tithing money. I'd like to see non-excess tithing money, but it's not my stewardship. I'm not going to tell the church what to do.
Stephen?
I think Jim is probably on the majority on this.
He is indeed 67% disagree or strongly disagree with that statement. War is never justified.
Strongly disagree. I don't think you can read the Book of Mormon and agree with that.
There's some people who are very adamant on the opposite side of you.
I'm sure, but I strongly disagree.
Yeah.
You can't say that World War II wasn't justified. I mean, you just can't do it.
Stephen, where do you think people landed on this one?
I think they side with Jim on this one.
Yep, about 90, a little over 90% disagree or strongly disagree that war is never justified. Pornography addiction should disqualify someone from entering the temple.
Again, such a loaded question. Such a loaded question because, first of all, what qualifies as pornography addiction? There's some who say, so, knowing I'm going to be in the minority, I am going to disagree and also make the case that the church agrees with me I read Boyd K. Packer's Little Factory pamphlet when I was 12 years old.
Oh,
It was given to
I
me,
have it
and
somewhere
I
back
was,
here.
and I had no idea what it meant. I had no idea what it meant, and I went to my mother, which was probably the wrong person to go to because she was very embarrassed.
Yeah.
And I just said, "What does this mean? What is he talking about? This factory that I'm going to set into overdrive? Well, what?" And she finally said, "It means don't play with your." And I took that to be, okay, so can I hold my when I pee? I'm serious. I was dead.
Yeah.
It messed me up. It made me terrified of my own body throughout my entire adolescence.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's funny. It sounds funny and it sounds ridiculous. It really is to some degree a huge source of trauma for me. Because
Okay.
I
I'm
really
sorry
did.
for laughing. Then I'm just.
No, but it's funny. It's absolutely funny. But I didn't know what the boundaries were. I didn't understand any of it. So whenever you start talking about pornography and masturbation to me, I'm coming at it with this whole mess of baggage that's attached to it. And I have watched with joy as the church has quietly shelved Boyd K. Packer's talk that I think did an enormous amount of damage, not just to me, but to a lot of young men. But it certainly, I can testify that it did a massive amount of damage to me personally. And the church has quietly, the church is not ever, I think, going to say, yeah, masturbation is great and pornography is great. And we think it's healthy and wonderful and just go nuts. The church is never, ever, ever going to do that. But the church has quietly said there is no ecclesiastical consequence for it.
Strongly disagree. Where do you think the majority lands, Stephen?
First of all, I think a majority of people are going to probably disagree with Jim on this one, but I also want to just add the caveat that pornography addiction and sex addiction are not recognized by the American Psychiatric Association as being real conditions. So I want to also add that into the conversation as well.
57.4% strongly agree that pornography addiction should disqualify someone from entering the temple. Last question here. And this one's kind of a...
Well, that's interesting that 43%, that's a much larger minority than I thought it would be.
Yeah. Last question, one that's a much more hotly debated now because of some recent news than it was when I first wrote the question, so I'm glad it was written. The shape and style of garments is primarily driven by culture.
Wrongly agree. I don't understand how anybody could not, especially in light of the new garments.
But
how could you disagree with that?
Is there a symbolic reason that necessitates that there's at least a minimum style/shape to them? For example, like, could there be crop tops?
Yeah,
so
why couldn't there?
Okay, yeah, some people would say no.
Well, I'd say there is, we know that there's a reason there's a mark on the knee of a garment. And so if the garment sort of became Speedo style, I think that would be difficult given the symbolic nature of the knee.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Like, so there are some limitations.
But like the crop top.
Oh, I meant crop of the midriff. That's what I meant.
Oh, the midriff?
Yeah.
I don't see any reason why you couldn't have that either.
Well, okay.
I don't know. I mean, I don't see any doctrinal reason. I can see a lot of cultural reasons, and I think it's probably unlikely. But hey. Yeah, I one of the reasons. So again, and Jacob's going to say, which brethren are you talking to? But this was not a conversation with a member of the brethren, and again, this was not a conversation with Aaron Sherinian, but it was a conversation with somebody that works for the church.
Okay.
In a significant position with the church. And he asked me, so I've just revealed his gender, but he asked me, what do you think is the biggest issue driving people out of the church right now, today? And I went, oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know. Is it LGBTQ issues? And he says, it's garments. He says, it's garments. And he says, because so many women are furious that they had to cover their shoulders for their wedding, and they had to cover their shoulders and were told that they were walking pornography, and now are being told that that sacrifice was for nothing, that it didn't mean anything, that it really wasn't tied to any sort of symbolism or doctrine. And he said, so the new garments have made conservative women in the church furious because it's undermined their sacrifice. My understanding of the garment is that they're markings that remind us of our covenants. It's symbolic of the garment that was placed on Adam and Eve. But the style of the garment is not described anywhere. And, initially the style of the garment was, wrist to ankle. And it isn't anymore. And I don't see any reason why it can't continue to change.
I think they're probably going to land with Jim in light of the fact that they did make changes, and it's obviously cultural changes because it was meant initially for women in tropical climates. So, and then of course now women are ordering their garments from Africa and other places so they can wear them here stateside. So I would think a majority would probably land on that, keeping in mind that I recently entertained 3 young missionaries of the Righteous Branch who were in the heat of Florida and had long sleeve shirts and pants because they wear the original garments. And so their culture has stayed in with the garments, but your church has radically altered the garments since their original designs.
Okay, this was actually surveyed before those changes were announced.
Oh.
And yet,
Okay.
66% agree or strongly agree that the shape and style of garments is primarily driven by culture. Okay, I'm preparing the results.
We did it.
Jim. Question to you, Jim, is where do you think you're going to land?
Well, what are my options?
So there's 4 quadrants. You can either be Orthodox justice, Orthodox mercy, progressive mercy, or progressive justice.
I like to think of myself as Orthodox mercy, but I think I may end up in progressive mercy.
Drum roll, please. I got the result. Bum, 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 bum. Let me share. This is very exciting.
Is it surprising?
This is where you landed. Jim Bennett.
I am Orthodox mercy.
You are Orthodox mercy. Almost right on
but
the
I'm not
line.
But not
Wow.
nearly as far into mercy as I thought I'd be. I thought I'd probably be 4 or 5 squares to the left into the progressive, but apparently not.
Apparently not. You're where you wanted to be.
Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that.
Fascinating.
So let me read the description of people who landed in your area. Jim Bennett, you landed in the Orthodox Mercy quadrant. This quadrant is characterized by a traditional faithful alignment with church teachings, combined with a strong emphasis on mercy, forgiveness, and understanding. Individuals here are likely to emphasize that while God's laws are unchanging, his love and grace are extended to everyone. They focus on the compassionate side of the doctrine, believing in a patient and merciful God who is eager to forgive and to support people in their efforts to grow spiritually. They believe there is room for mistakes on the journey to becoming more Christ-like. Does that align with what you think?
Yeah, I own all of that. That's it.